All right, so today we're going to get into one of the weirdest documents I've ever come across that's been declassified by the CIA. It's a book called The Adam and Eve Story, written by a guy named Chan Thomas. So take a look at this. This is the cover of the book from 1965. And right there at the top, you see that stamp, declassified. I mean, that just jumps out at you, right? It raises this huge question right from the get-go. Why on earth would the CIA classify and then later declassify a book about Adam and Eve and geological disasters?
So, who wrote this thing? A man named Chan Thomas. Now, according to his own bio in the book, he called himself a researcher and the world's top authority in a field he dubbed cataclysmic geology. A field that, let's be honest, is way outside of mainstream science, as we're about to see.
Okay, so what could he have possibly written that was so sensitive? Let's dive into the first part of his theory, his absolutely terrifying vision of the next cataclysm. See, for Thomas, these world-ending disasters weren't just one-and-done events. He was convinced they happen in a cycle. He pinpoints what he calls Adam and Eve's tumble way back 11,500 years ago, and Noah's flood about 6,500 years ago, which, if you're following his math, kind of suggests we're, well, due for another one.
And his description of this next cataclysm is like something straight out of a disaster movie. He talks about this rumble you can't even hear that gives way to a 2-mile-high wall of water just screaming across the continents at supersonic speeds. It's pure, unfiltered apocalypse. And it doesn't stop with a flood. Oh no, the disaster is followed by a sudden, catastrophic deep freeze. Thomas claims that entire continents and everything on them would be frozen solid in just a few hours. He's literally describing a global reset button. So a 2-mile-high wave and a global flash freeze. You gotta be asking, what in the world could cause something like that? And this brings us to the very heart of his physical theory, the pole shift. To try and explain this wild idea, Thomas actually included this diagram of the Earth's layers in his book. He argues that the key to all of this isn't something from space or on the surface. Nope, it's what happens deep inside our planet's core. Let's try and break down his proposed mechanism here. First, he says that every few thousand years, some kind of neutral matter escapes the inner core. Second, this stuff causes a literal atomic explosion out in the molten outer core. Third, that explosion messes up the Earth's entire magnetic field. And finally, and this is the real kicker, this turns a molten layer into a sort of lubricant, letting the entire 60-mile thick crust of the Earth just slide around over the inside.
He even has a name for this trigger, nature's power plant. This whole idea of neutral matter causing an atomic explosion inside the Earth, that is the absolute linchpin of his entire theory. It's what he claims allows the ice caps to suddenly be pulled toward the equator, causing the whole crust to just tumble. Okay, so we have a pretty wild geological theory, but the book isn't called the pole shift story, right? It's the Adam and Eve story, and this is where things somehow get even weirder. Let's look at how this builds into a radical reinterpretation of the book of Genesis.
Thomas basically asks, what if Genesis isn't a religious myth, but a garbled history? He decided to just treat it not as scripture, but as a distorted account of a real event. That last great cataclysm he thinks happened 11,500 years ago. And when I say his interpretation is radical, I mean he completely flips it on its head. Adam and Eve, not the first humans, but survivors of a lost civilization. The Garden of Eden, not a paradise, but a mother continent in the Pacific. The serpent, not evil, just a symbol for the ocean. And the fall of man, forget sin. He says it's just a misunderstood story about survival and migration. So how did he get here? He claims the original story was written in ancient symbols he calls Naga glyphs, and they were just badly mistranslated. He gives us a key. The tree of life was the continent itself. The serpent was the ocean around it. The cherubims with flaming swords weren't angels, but symbols for the fiery earthquakes that were destroying the continent's foundations. So the bottom line of this whole reinterpretation is this. Adam and Eve were refugees. They were descendants of some great civilization, and they had to flee as their entire world literally sank beneath the waves. And the story of their survival just got passed down and twisted over thousands of years. So let's bring this all together. We have a vision of a cyclical apocalypse, a fringe scientific theory to explain it, and a complete rewrite of one of humanity's most foundational stories. Which brings us right back to where we started.
So, to recap the core claims from Chan Thomas's book, the Earth's crust tumbles every few thousand years in a civilization-ending cataclysm. This pole shift is the real event behind stories like Noah's flood, and the story of Adam and Eve is actually the misunderstood history of survivors from a lost Pacific continent. Which leaves us with the one question this document doesn't answer. You've now seen the wild theories packed inside its pages. So why would the Central Intelligence Agency classify a book like this? Was there some grain of truth in here they found concerning? Was it a useful piece of disinformation? Or was it something else entirely? The document itself offers no clues, leaving that as the central, unanswered mystery of the Adam and Eve story.